Hitman may be the surprise movie of the year, and in my opinion, it's the best movie that Netflix has come out with in a while. So let's talk about this thing. Now, this will be a spoiler-free movie review, but if you do want to see what I gave this movie out of 10, head over to my shorts, TikTok, or Instagram and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, let's talk about Hitman. So this movie is directed by Richard Linklater, and he is the same director who directed the iconic Dazed and Confused movie. And in his newest film, we follow Glen Powell, who plays Gary Johnson, who is a fake hitman for the police. But once he falls for one of his clients, things get complicated super quickly as he tries to keep his now two lives separate. Starting things off with the good, and the first thing I have here is both Glen Powell and Adria Arjona. Now, starting things off with Glen Powell, he was just so fun and charismatic and entertaining throughout this whole movie. Seeing him dress up as all these different hitmen and characters was just hilarious to me and one of my favorite parts of the movie. And then on top of that, he actually played all these different personalities really well too. I mean, probably my favorite part of the movie is when he dressed up as Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, and his impersonation of Christian Bale in that scene was just so perfect that it was hilarious. And I've said this multiple times before, but I truly think that Glen Powell is this generation's movie star, and he lives up to that in this movie. And as this movie goes on, he essentially plays two different characters in this movie, one being Gary Johnson, who is the character he actually is in this movie, and then one being the hitman Ron. And seeing him jump back and forth between these two personalities really shows his range in this movie. I mean, we all know that Glenn can pull off Ron's personality, who is just a super cool, charismatic, charming guy, but we didn't necessarily know if he could pull off Gary's personality, which is this nerdy teacher who really doesn't have much going on for him at the moment, and he just pulls both characters off beautifully. And then come to the end of the movie, all of a sudden as the viewer, you don't know whether he's playing Gary or whether he's playing Ron, and you really can't differentiate the two. So kudos to Glen Powell because he just does a great job at playing multiple personalities throughout this film. Moving on to Adria Arjona, who plays Madison in this movie, and she was also great in this thing. Her chemistry with Glen Powell was just off the charts, and you notice this the minute these two characters meet on screen, and it is just absolute fireworks, quite literally and figuratively, if you know what I mean. A lot of this movie was put on their shoulders, and when they were on screen together, they absolutely delivered, and that's when I thought this movie was at its best. Next up for the good, I have the storytelling, and there were certain aspects of this story that I think they told very creatively, in my opinion. Now, overall, this story is pretty straightforward, but when it came to the more psychological side of things and what was going on in our main character's head, I think they approached that aspect of the story and explained that aspect of the story very creatively. So Gary Johnson was also a teacher in this film, and his teachings always mirrored where he was at psychologically at that point in the film, as he was jumping back between playing Gary Johnson and Ron. And I just thought that was a super cool, sneaky way to not only put us in the mind of our main character and let us know what he was thinking at that given time in the movie, but to also show the progression of our character as he becomes this kind of new personality with both Gary and Ron blending. These classroom scenes really added some layers and some substance to this story, and it honestly kind of made me want more of these classroom scenes so we could learn more about what's going on in Gary's mind as this movie goes on. And finally, for the good, I have the ending. Now, the ending was kind of twisted in this movie, but I liked it, and it was something I definitely didn't expect that they would go that route. And I know I shouldn't have been cheering for our main characters in that moment, but I just thought this ending was so good that I just couldn't help but cheer for them. Now, I won't spoil it, but as I was watching the second half of this movie, I was definitely wondering how in the world are they going to end this thing. And then I watched the last like 15 minutes or so of this film, and I saw the direction that they went with this ending, and I was like, huh, that's kind of twisted, but it also kind of makes sense for not only the story, but also for where our characters were at psychologically at that point in the movie as well. Long story short, at the end of the day, it was an unexpected ending, but it made sense in the context of the story, and that's why I really liked it. Moving on to the so-so, and the only thing I have here is that there are a couple of twists in this movie that you can definitely see coming. Now, these aren't the type of things that you're going to be able to see from a mile away, like, oh, I knew this was going to happen, so since the beginning of the movie. These are more things that as this movie goes on, you're gonna be like, oh, this person's probably gonna show up here and this is probably going to happen. And a lot of this happens in the second half of the movie when things really start to pick up, so it takes some of the suspense out of it just a little bit. But for me, the ending saved it, in my opinion. I thought this ending was so good and so unpredictable that it made up for all the other stuff that you could probably predict leading up to it. And finally, getting into the bad, and the only thing I have here is that as good as this movie is, it does take a while to really get going and for things to really start getting crazy. Now, the first half of this movie really focused on Gary being a fake hitman and his relationship with Madison. And don't get me wrong, I thought the first half of this movie was really fun, but I could also see someone else being like, hey, not much happened in the first half of this movie. But after that first half of the movie, really about like an hour in, things really start to pick up, because in the second half of this movie, that's when all the twists and crazy stuff starts to happen. And even though I did enjoy the second half of the movie, with them putting all the things that really drove the plot forward in that part of the movie, I couldn't help to feel that the second half of this thing felt a little bit more rushed, because things were just happening scene after scene after scene, and it didn't really breathe at all in the second half of this thing. Now, this didn't lessen my experience with this movie or make me necessarily dislike it more. I just wish they would have got going just a little bit quicker than they did. But overall, I think this is one of Netflix's best movies in the past couple of years. Glen, Powell, and Adria, Arjona have great chemistry and carry this movie. It's a lot of fun, super entertaining, and is a movie I would definitely recommend. Those are my thoughts on Hitman. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.